Daniel 2 and verse 46 is where we left off last week. And we remember that Nebuchadnezzar has just been given the dream by Daniel. He's told what it was, and he's told the meaning of the dream to Nebuchadnezzar. So in verse 46, then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshiped Daniel, and commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. Now, the king Nebuchadnezzar, notice, falls on his face. The idea basically really, it's not just the idea we have of falling and literally landing on his face. It's the idea that he prostrated himself. He worshiped Daniel. Prostration was a normal method of worship in those days. As you go back through the Old Testament, you'll notice many times you'll see this idea of someone worshiping and prostrating themselves in order to do that worship. Today, probably the major people that do this are those who are Islamic. And they have certain times of the day, they have their prayer rug, they're supposed to lay their prayer rug down pointing toward Mecca, and then they bow themselves. And I observed this when I was in Indonesia. When they bow themselves, they go down on their knees and bow and touch their hands to the floor, and then they stretch out toward what they're worshiping. And I might add this, that the Islamic religion, is really worshiping the devil like any other false religion. Prostration was a normal way of doing it, but also prostration was also done for another reason. It was sometimes done to respect or show submission toward one who outranked them. Now think about this. Who did Nebuchadnezzar prostrate himself to? Daniel. Even if we didn't have the word worshiped here, even that, he's showing himself to be under Daniel in this. It's kind of interesting to me. The particular word for worship is only found, this particular word, it's segid. And segid is only used in the book of Daniel. It's not used in any other place where the word worship is found. It's used 12 times in the book of Daniel, 11 times in the chapter that we're in chapter 2. And no doubt it's used here for the act of worship. I don't think it's a matter of him showing respect to Daniel because of the meaning of the word and the way it's used, and only found in this book. For a human being to accept worship as a god is absolutely forbidden by God. No human being has the right to assume the right to be worshiped as some deity, some great one that is beyond human ability. Sagid is also defined as a bowing out of respect for another. So again, the word can be used either way, but here I believe it's being used to signify an act of adoration to a deity. Well, why is there no indication that Daniel objected to being worshipped by Nebuchadnezzar? In Acts chapter 14, you remember, when the people tried to sacrifice to Paul and Barnabas, what did they do? They immediately, when they realized that worship was being attempted to them, Paul immediately, strenuously objected to them doing this. Remember Daniel 2, verse 28 and 29? Let's just go back there and look at it for a minute. In Daniel 2, verse 28 and 29, But there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Notice Daniel had informed the king before the king tried to worship him that I'm not the one you worship. He'd already point blank let him know. In the instance where we see Paul in Acts, we don't see him telling them ahead of time, I'm not a God. I'm not the one to be worshiped. But in our context, in verse 28 and 29, he says, Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, that thou shalt come to pass afterwards, and he that revealeth secrets maketh known to thee what shall come to pass. Remember, that's prefaced by him telling Nebuchadnezzar, there is a God in heaven. I'm not the one who can tell you what this God can. So Daniel, I believe the emphasis here is Daniel had informed him already that God is the one who's going to reveal the dream. God is the one who's going to reveal the meaning of the dream. Daniel isn't the one who's doing this. God is feeding him, so to speak, information, which I wish we could have fed the information up on the screen tonight. But God is the one who's going to be feeding him, Daniel, the information that Nebuchadnezzar on his bed was wondering about and thinking about, and then in his sleep, God sent him a dream. And remember, we noticed that it talked about dreams plural. In other words, this seems to be a dream that was done over and over again. You ever have one of those nights where you have a dream and you wake up and you're shaking it off, and then you go back to bed and you go to sleep and the dream comes back again? If you haven't, I'll tell you what, it's weird. I have it happen to me all the time. I'll be dreaming something, and then I wake up, you think, okay, that'll clear your mind, you're going to think about something else here. No, you go back to sleep, and the same dream. I've had that happen numerous times, over and over during the night, and it doesn't make for a restful sleep. Daniel has already given credit where credit's due. And we need to make sure we do the same thing. You know, I've wondered about this sometimes when people praise us for something that we've done, not necessarily so much in, say, athletics or something like that, but it has a religious connotation. I've sometimes wondered if we ought not to make sure that at that moment, either silently or out loud, say something that a good friend of mine always says, to God be the glory. It's not me that's given me the capabilities that think these things. It's not me that has given us the book that will judge us someday, the rules for our conduct, etc. They all came from God. And everything we do should be done in such a way that it causes God to be glorified. The timing here seems to be the key to whether Daniel should have said anything or not. Look at the timing. Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar beforehand who it was that should be worshiped, who it was that was giving this information to him. In Paul's case, Paul and Barnabas performed the miracles, and then they tried to worship them. And so there seems to be a matter of timing. And note in both cases that sacrifice was ordered in Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar orders incense to be made toward Daniel. Well, what was incense primarily used? Again, we look at the worship that's condoned by God, and it included incense, which we know from the New Testament symbolized, prefigured prayer, rising up toward God. And there's something in the next verse which I believe plays into this. The king answered unto Daniel and said, let's look at that in just a moment, or for a moment. Apparently, Daniel said something between these two verses, between verse 46 and 47, to Nebuchadnezzar, and notice what's said. The king answered unto Daniel. Well, I don't see anything being said here to the king by Daniel directly to you. You know, we don't have everything in the Bible that was done in any time frame. For instance, if you go back to the book of Genesis in chapter 1, we have generalizations of this was created, this was created, this was created on each of these days, but we don't have the details of how God did it. It's not necessary. We don't need to know. But then in chapter 2, he decides that there is something we need to know, and so he talks to us and tells us about the creation of man and woman, and also with the idea of what they were to do and how woman was created. Isn't that interesting? So we don't have everything, but there does appear between verse 40 and 6 to have been a gap here where Daniel said something because the king appears to answer him. So did Daniel set Nebuchadnezzar straight about who should be worshiped, even though he had already done this before? He gave the meaning of the details of the dream and then the meaning of the dream. Was it a common practice in those times to pay homage through one who served the God under consideration? I would not have thought about that, except I ran across this in Butler's commentary, where he quoted Josephus. Josephus recorded that Alexander the Great bowed before the high priest of the Jews, and then asked by his general Parmenio as to the meaning of his actions. He replied, I do not worship the high priest, but the God whose high priesthood he has been honored. You see, Alexander had the idea he bowed before the priest of the Jews. Why? Because he was actually bowing before and recognizing the God who made that man the high priest. And so it is an interesting consideration there. There's also the consideration that Nebuchadnezzar never addressed Daniel as a god. You notice that? It's not found in our text. Nebuchadnezzar never called Daniel God. He never called Daniel a god. But when he spoke about Daniel's God, then he referred to him as a god among many. Look at verse 47. The king answered unto Daniel, said, Of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal this secret. The king answered unto Daniel. If I answered you, does that not imply that you had asked me a question or made a statement of some kind and I needed to respond to it? It's pretty obvious something has been said between these two verses. And what did the king say? First, he says, of a truth it is. Notice that. Of a truth it is that your God is a God, of gods and a Lord of kings. The word Lord, of course, refers to one who is a ruler. Of a truth it is. It's obvious to Nebuchadnezzar. But notice a key word in this text, that your God. You know, some have tried to say, oh, Nebuchadnezzar was converted at this time. He became a worshiper, a monotheist. No. Your God says that he implies that you have your God and I have my God. I'm still a polytheist. But notice the text as it goes on. Of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods. Now you see the difference there? A God, not the God, a God. It's your God. He didn't say my God, your God. In spite of God's demonstration that we see in this chapter to Nebuchadnezzar, what Nebuchadnezzar had witnessed, heard, Nebuchadnezzar could only think in polytheistic terms. He couldn't think as a monotheist. A one God, only one God, no other gods. Your God, a God of gods. And notice the statement, and a Lord of kings. Lord, ruler. A ruler of kings. And notice then that he says, your God is a revealer of secrets. The unknown. He can tell us about what is unknown, what we don't know. Things we have no possibility of understanding or knowing. He has the ability to then tell us about them and reveal the meaning. Seeing thou couldst reveal this secret. He's a revealer of secrets. How do I know that? Because he told you. Now notice this. He gives the credit where it belongs this time to God. He's revealed to you the secret. What we couldn't know in and of ourselves. Daniel, your God revealed what no one else could reveal, or no one claiming to be a God could reveal. Remember, his astrologers and wise men and all these men who claimed to be in touch with the gods couldn't tell him what this dream meant, even this time when he told them, or later, we'll notice, when he told them what the dream was and then asked. They couldn't do it then either. This is an admission by Nebuchadnezzar that his gods, the things he pretended were gods, were inferior to the God of heaven. Though he didn't seem to realize that that's what he was doing. It's hard, and we need to understand this about our denominational friends. We tell them the truth and show them, and we expect them, oh, there it is, accept it. And we wonder, oh, how can they not see that? Isn't it hard for someone who all their life has been steeped in false religion to give up that false religion? I'll give you an example. When Jenny and I married, she wasn't a member of the Lord's church. And she'll tell you, she fought it. She'd listen to the preacher because I had enough gumption not to say, we're not going to that so-called church. So she attended with me. And she'd listen to what he said, and she fought it and fought it and fought it, and finally she just couldn't fight it anymore. It's hard for those who all their life have been steeped in false religion to give it up for the truth. And this was true in paganism, and is still true today in denominationalism. Our denominationalism, friends, many of them have heard this same thing over and over, these falsehoods, over and over and over and over, from the time they were little bitty babies. And we may now be approaching them when they're 35, and we expect them the moment they see the truth here written out, that even though it's the truth, they have trouble accepting it. And we need to understand that about them and try to be patient with them. After all, wasn't God long-suffering, patient with us? How long might some of us in this very room tonight, or on the air looking at or listening to this right now, how many of us took us a long time to see that something we were doing or saying or whatever was sin, and to give it up? We need to be long-suffering with them, patient. Look at verse 48. Then the king made Daniel a great man, and gave him many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. It was very common, especially in those days, and it's still done today, by rulers to reward those who had done some great job for them. Either in those times, either with rank or with wealth. And we see the same thing happening even in America today, don't we? Who does a president usually choose for his cabinet? Wasn't it those who supported him and showed that they'd done some great work in a particular area? That's usually how it's done. It amazed me. I've been doing some historical reading about our country, and President Lincoln was interesting. He appointed some of the men to his cabinet that didn't agree with him and were actually staunchly rebellious against some of the things that he believed in and promoted in the area in which they were made a cabinet member. Isn't that interesting? It's very seldom done. Daniel is given both rank and wealth. He's promoted to be over all in the province. That includes the city of Babylon, the province of Babylon in which the city of Babylon was. And he's given great wealth for the service he's just rendered to Nebuchadnezzar. What service? Again, telling him what the dream was, first of all, and then telling him what the dream meant. And even though he attributed it, understood that Daniel was getting this information from God, otherwise he couldn't have revealed it, he gave Daniel the promotion. But now watch verse 49. We see a little bit about Daniel here. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king. See, after Daniel was honored by Nebuchadnezzar, he made a request to the king. And we can know what that request is, even though it's not specifically given to us, because we're told then that the request was made to the king. There's the king is your last proper noun used, and he, pronoun, refers back to the last proper noun unless there's a reason not to. And he, the king, set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province. He requested that they be given a reward. Maybe he just put it in those words. You know, they helped me in this, and they deserve some kind of reward if you're going to reward me. And consider what we've seen about Daniel already in this book, and see how this fits in. We see Daniel was brave, he was respectful of authority, and notice that respect for authority was both secular and physical. He showed respect for those who ranked above him in the empire in which he was in. But he also showed proper respect for the God of heaven. And he promoted that respect to this pagan king. We also see that Daniel was merciful, he was honorable, he was loyal, he was humble, and he was unselfish. Isn't that the one we see here in this verse? He was unselfish. I'm not the only one that deserves some credit in this thing. My friends helped me. What did they do? They prayed to God with regard to this after Daniel revealed what had been going on in the palace. And he credits that their prayers, along with his prayer, had an effect that caused God to deliver the answer. And he thinks if the king's going to reward me, he needs to give them something too. Daniel saw his three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah's actions as just as important as his action, their prayers, for the success that had been demonstrated to the king. I find this interesting because it's similar to what we see in the book of Esther. Getting all the Jews, Esther did, when she knew that she needed to go before the king, when the penalty for going before him, when she had not been called in about a month or longer, that the penalty for showing up in front of him was death unless he extended the scepter to her. Remember when we studied that? That doesn't just mean pointing it toward the person, it means the person putting their hand on that scepter, showing their acceptance of their position. And what did she do? She asked Mordecai, tell the Jews in the whole city to pray and fast for her, that will all go well, in other words. Nebuchadnezzar promoted them at Daniel's request, and they were placed over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Now notice a distinction then is also made between Daniel and his friends. They didn't receive the same promotion he did. His promotion involved the affairs of the province. To stand in the gate in those times, what was done in cities and places where authority was, to stand in the gate meant that you were one of the people who would help make the decisions that needed to be made for that city or that province, or in this case, in the kingdom, the empire of Nebuchadnezzar. So Daniel, we see, is deeply rooted with authority that with regard to the affairs of the kingdom. Now that's going to bring us to chapter 3, and I made your little question books again. Ron, would you pass these out, please, to everyone? I feel bad because we can't put this up on the screen because, again, some of the questions, they're all answered either from the text that I have developed or from God's Word. So there's your question book, and you need to give one for Chrissy too. But now we're going to go into Daniel chapter 3. And last time when we started chapter 2, we went ahead and read the chapter. Chapter 3 is a little bit of a lengthy chapter, for 30 verses in it. It looks more lengthy to me than it does to you because of the size of the print of my Bible. It's huge, so that I can see it. So let's go ahead and read the chapter, and then we'll come back and make comments. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 80 cubits, and the breadth thereof was 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, and the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. When the princes, the governors, captains, judges, treasurers, counselors, sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried aloud, To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psalter, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. And whosoever falleth not down and worshipeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Therefore at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshiped the golden image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. They spake and said to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whosoever falleth not down and worshipeth, that he should be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now if ye be ready, that at the time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the image which I have made, well. But if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. And he commanded the most mighty men that were of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astoned, and he rose up in haste and spake and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace, and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. And the princes, governors, and captains, and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word, and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree, that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Pretty interesting chapter, isn't it? There are some ideas in this chapter which are not portrayed as accurately from the New King James to help us to better understand this, but we'll get into those. Look again at verse 1 with me. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So the first thing that's revealed to us, and notice something, we don't know the time frame between chapter 2, and chapter 3. We don't know if it was many years or a short time later, maybe a couple of years. But Nebuchadnezzar makes an image, and he sets it up. What did this image look like? It's described in terms that would lead us to think, well, it looked like a man. Well, that also makes or creates a question in our minds. What was it made of? Of gold. Now, was this solid gold statue, or was it gold plated? Now, I know we're tempted to say, well, it must have been gold plated. This was big. But we know that there were images that were quite large in the city of Babylon through history of their enemies and historians that tell us about golden images, solid gold, that were huge, as big or bigger than this one that we see here. Pure gold or plated? Well, the Georgia Dome is plated with gold. That's actual gold. It's 23 karat gold. It's not 24 karat, it's 23 karat gold. That would weigh the amount of gold that it took to cover that dome with that very thin sheet is about 3 pounds of gold. Today, you could multiply 3 pounds times 14 ounces. A troy ounce of gold is 14 ounces, not 16. Multiply that by, I believe it was around $4,000 an ounce right now, and you would have the value of the gold that was put on the dome. Well, how big was this image? Well, it was 30 cubits by 6. Well, what does that mean? We don't use cubits today. We know that the cubit was, generally speaking, 18 inches long. 45 feet by 9 feet, this statue. It's big. It's a big statue. Well, where was Dura? Dumelow thought that it was about, or in the area that is known as the Mounds of Dura, which would have been about 12 miles south-southeast of the city of Babylon. The truth is, we don't know exactly where this was. It's a matter of speculation. Then also, what did this image represent? Was it a god out of his pantheon of gods, what they envisioned maybe this god could look like? Remember, many of their gods really were grotesque. If you've ever seen the gods of the Hindus as they portray them, it's grotesque. They're frightening images many times, and all distortions are made. I've got a statue at home. I wanted to have it, and I didn't think to bring it to show you. I asked one of the Indonesian brethren to get it for me so that I could show people the kind of thing in America that they worshiped, the Hindu religion worshiped. It's this eagle with, or a bird with kind of an eagle beak on it. In itself is rather grotesque, and then riding on the neck of the eagle, or this god is called Garuda, which in our language would be translated to an eagle. On the back of Garuda is another little image that looks more like a man, and they're together, and that's a god that you worshiped over there. And so I have a wood thing of this so I could show people. Was this a god in his pantheon? Maybe distorted like Hindu gods were, like other gods of that time? Or did it represent himself as a god? We've already noticed that the image bears what description we do have of it, bears what probably looked like a man, or somewhat like a man. We don't know what this image represented, but one thing is clear. It was to be worshiped. It was an image made specifically to be worshiped. Verse 11 and 12 of our text will show us that. The word worship is used 11 times in this chapter with regard to this image. That gets us started in the third chapter, and we'll come back next week and begin in verse 2 of chapter 3, verses 2 and 3. Thank you for your attention, and hope that we have helped our understanding of in the book of Daniel and the things that God would have us to know. Remember, these things are written for our learning. They're lessons that we need to learn from the Old Testament. And it shows us that God is the same. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. What he expected then was obedience. What he expects now is obedience. And when we obey him, he's willing to show us forgiveness, mercy, and grace. Thank you for your attention.